Okay, so this is our flipped lecture on oil energy. So our first question was, what is petroleum oil exactly? And through much research, we found that petroleum oil is a liquid formed from a complex natural mixture of hydrocarbons and other miscellaneous organic compounds such as phytoplankton and other uh, single organism beings. Uh, so once it is found, which sort of takes uh, a lot of effort in the first place, it's extracted and brought to the surface, and it's used in a variety of different ways. In America, it's usually used for cars and machinery. Um, Petroleum is also known as crude oil because it is a raw material, and it comes from the Latin roots petra meaning rock and oleum meaning oil. How is petroleum formed? Uh, and there's actually a debate going on amongst scientists as to how organic oil actually forms, but the most widely accepted theory is that dead phytoplanktons remains settle to the bottom of the ocean and they get buried in mud. And as the years go by, layers of sediment begin to add pressure to the dead organisms, and they create oil molecules. And more millions of years go by, and the oil begins to collect, but it's still trapped underneath this rock, and so we have to drill to find it. Um, the Middle East is the world's largest oil producer, but Venezuela, the U.S., and Mexico also have a lot of oil-enriched rock very far down below the surface. Um, and these days, oil is harder and harder to find, so it's primarily found underneath oceans.
Okay, so the next question is, how is petroleum transported? And so we know that we get most of our oil from the Middle East, and so crude oil often travels 10,000 plus miles from the Middle East to the U.S. and within the U.S. Um, the most popular method of petroleum transport is underground pipelines. These are made of steel and plastic. There's kind of a network going on underground that transports petroleum or oil to the places that we need it. So the oil is kept in motion by pumps, and this is especially effective across land. It's not really used across ocean because oversea the majority of the oil is transported by large tanker ships because it's kind of expensive to put a bunch of pipes underground. As you can see, this is our top right tanker ship, top left pipelines, and then we have a pie chart that says total oil transport and uses of oil.
That's Aiza.
It's me. Oil is used for a long list of applications in the modern world and in America. It's used for transportation fuels, which are basically like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. It's used for military defense, fertilizer, heating, feedstock, which is raw material to supply or fuel a machine or industrial process. It's used for petrochemicals, solvents, and electrical generation. Um, the extraction of oil. Um, so after the location of an oil deposit is like determined, it's taken like the process of oil drilling is used to extract it. So there are like three main steps to this process. The first is like the land is prepared for drilling. Um, so like access roads must be built so that vehicles can enter and leave the site. And then a source of water must be made available because it's needed for the drilling process. Um, and then setting up the rig is like the second step. Um, and then after that, striking oil. The process of testing for oil begins, done by core samples and drill stem testing measures. Then an oil pump is run down the shaft and extraction begins. So yeah, basically.
How much oil is left? There's no definite way to tell how much oil is left since oil companies tend to release inaccurate information. However, scientists have calculated and estimated that we have used approximately half of the world's oil reserves so far. So scientists To calculate this, scientists use the reserve to production ratio to calculate how long our oil supplies will last. To get to the reserves to production ratio, you divide the amount of total remaining reserves by the annual rate of production. So with our current production of about 30 billion barrels a year, we have enough oil for about 40 more years. But a lot of scientists insist that crisis will occur not when we run out of oil, but when the rate of production begins to decline, because the oil demand will always be increasing, and if production drops, there'll be an immediate oil shortage. And so the peak oil theory was developed by a geologist named M. King Hubbard. So he originally predicted U.S. oil production would peak around the year 1970, and he proved right, and oil production in the U.S. has been dropping since then. And then he did some more calculations and calculated that the global oil production would peak around 1995, but the global oil production continued to rise. And another geologist named Kenneth DeFries believed that the peak has already passed in 1995. How clean does oil burn? Burning oil for fuel is not as clean as burning natural gas. Burning oil releases carbon into the atmosphere, which bonds with oxygen in the atmosphere and produces CO2, which is a greenhouse gas which warms our planet. Burning oil also releases methane, another greenhouse gas, as well as sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. And sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are what contribute to acid deposition in our environment, which cause acid rain and deteriorates our environment. Burning of gasoline in cars releases hydrocarbons carbons like benzene and toluene, which are carcinogenic to laboratory animals, meaning they're probably also carcinogenic to humans too. And then oil can also contaminate groundwater supplies from runoff and whatnot.
Okay. And lastly, is petroleum a viable fuel source for the future? Because petroleum is formed from fossil fuels, it's not a viable fuel source for the future because fossil fuels are, as we know, a non renewable source of energy. But the main argument, uneducated environmental activists will say that we're running out of fossil fuels and that's why we need to change our ways, and that is true. However, more so than fossil fuels actually running out, just the whole process of extracting oil will just become more and more expensive as we keep going deeper and deeper, and it will cease to be economically viable. So, as the obvious oil sources are being depleted, more energy and money is being spent extracting oil from deeper locations. And so, when more energy and money is being spent than the energy being extracted and money earned, petroleum will no longer be viable. The end.